Um, Imagine for a second that you are sitting at a massive, incredibly high-stakes game of poker.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Yeah, so you're at this sprawling table, right? Crowded room, chips piled high, and there's that, like, undeniable heavy tension in the air.
The classic casino vibe.
Exactly. So the dealer distributes the hands, you pick yours up, and you realize there is one major catch to this particular game.
Let me guess. The cards are terrible.
No, it's weirder. Your cards are completely blank.
Wait, blank. Like nothing on them?
Nothing. You look closely at the white cardboard, flip them over, check the backs, nothing. No suits, no numbers, just blank space.
Which, I mean, that fundamentally breaks the mechanics of poker. If no one has a hand to play, the game shouldn't even exist.
Right. That is the logical assumption. It sounds impossible. But as you look around this room, you realize this wild part. Everyone at the table is still betting.
Oh, wow. Without seeing any cards.
Yeah. They're still throwing chips into the center. They're
Ugh.
raising, aggressively folding, and they're still ranking each other's hands.
I guess on what exactly?
Well, based entirely on how the other people are acting. Like they're watching how a player shifts in their chair, or how quickly they toss their chips into the pot.
Ah, picking up on the tells, the micro expressions around their eyes when the dealer speaks, that sort of thing.
Exactly. You are constantly judging their worth, and they're constantly judging yours, all without ever seeing a single card.
So the behavior basically becomes the entire currency of the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there are no objective cards to look at, the only reality that matters is, well, the signal being projected.
And the reality is this isn't some hypothetical parlor trick. This is just everyday human life.
It really is.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a custom-tailored mission today that is, I think, going to completely shift how you view every interaction you have from here on out.
It's definitely a paradigm-shifting topic.
Totally. Our aim is to decode the invisible signals we send each other every single day. We're looking at a massive stack of sources today, ranging from evolutionary biology and behavioral psychology to modern philosophy and even the latest neural imaging studies.
It's a really comprehensive look at human behavior.
It really is. We're going to figure out exactly why we care so much about social status, the frankly bizarre, sometimes dangerous things we do to get it, and how our brains are literally wired at a structural level to track the hierarchy around us.
Yeah, and it's a journey that fundamentally changes your perspective on human motivation, because when you immerse yourself in this literature, a very clear pattern emerges.
Which is?
That humans, along with most of the animal kingdom, are just utterly obsessed with rank.
Oh, absolutely.
We are broadcasting our position in the hierarchy at all times, and our brains are relentlessly scanning the broadcasts of everyone else in the room.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are going to travel from the absurdly large tales of peacocks in the wild to the hidden evolutionary math behind human generosity to the highly toxic illusions of moral grandstanding on the internet.
A very modern problem.
Definitely. And finally, we'll get into the actual physical brain regions that calculate whether you are popular or not.
Right, the neuroscience of it all.
But to truly understand the dynamics of a corporate boardroom or a high school cafeteria, we have to start way before those things existed.
We have to go back to the wild.
Exactly. We have to
Sure.
start with the foundational architecture of communication.
Because to understand the boardroom, you really have to understand the jungle. And that leads us directly into what evolutionary biologists call signaling theory,
Right.
which is basically the framework for how any living thing communicates information to another living thing.
Yeah, and I noticed the sources make a really sharp, like non-negotiable distinction right out of the gate between two words, a cue and a signal.
Yes, that distinction is crucial.
Because in our everyday, casual language, we use those interchangeably, right? If I see dark clouds, I say, it's a signal it's going to rain, or a cue it's going to rain.
Right, in conversation, no one cares. But biologically speaking, mixing those up completely misses the point of how evolution works.
Okay, so break that down for us. Why is it a mistake?
Well, mixing them up is a category error in biology. They are fundamentally different phenomena. Let's look at a cue first.
Oh,
A cue is entirely inadvertent. It is just a byproduct of an organism existing and moving through the physical world.
give me an example.
Sure. Consider a small bird foraging for insects on the forest floor. It's hungry, it's hopping around, and in the process, its feet rustle the dead leaves.
Just normal bird stuff.
Exactly. But that acoustic sound, the rustling, might alert a stalking predator, like a feral cat, to the bird's exact location.
Oh, not great for the bird.
No, not at all. Now, the bird obviously did not intend to make that sound. It didn't evolve the behavior of leaf rustling for the purpose of attracting predators.
Right, it's just trying to find lunch.
Yeah, exactly. The sound is just a physical byproduct of walking on dry leaves. That is a cue.
So the predator is essentially just eavesdropping on the physical reality of the bird's life. The bird is, like, leaking information without wanting to.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. Information leakage. A signal, on the other hand, is completely deliberate from an evolutionary standpoint.
Deliberate how?
Well, a signal is a physical trait or a specific action that has evolved over generations for the explicit purpose of changing the behavior of the receiver.
Okay.
And crucially, it changes that behavior in a way that benefits the sender.
Okay, I was reading about the Eurasian jay in the sources, and it perfectly illustrates this.
Well, that's a great example.
Yeah, so sticking with the bird and the predator scenario.
Yeah.
Let's say a Eurasian jay is up in a tree, and it spots a predator, maybe a hawk resting nearby, or a cat stalking through the brush.
A very dangerous situation.
Right. Now, the jay doesn't do what logic tells us it should do, which is freeze, blend into the branches, and quietly hide.
Which is the cue avoidance strategy.
Exactly. Instead, it deliberately issues this incredibly loud, harsh, repetitive warning call. It actively broadcasts its exact location to the very thing that wants to kill it.
Which, on the surface, seems like an evolutionary death wish. Why draw attention to yourself when a lethal threat is present?
Right. If I am hiking and I see a grizzly bear, I am not screaming at the top of my lungs to ensure the bear knows my coordinates.
Definitely not recommended.
No, I am slowly backing away and trying to be invisible.
And that is the rational human response. But the Eurasian jay is playing a different game. It is sending a highly specific, evolved message to that predator.
What's the message?
The message is essentially, I see you, I know exactly where you are, you rely entirely on the element of surprise to ambush your prey, and I am letting you know that the element of surprise is completely gone.
Oh.
So it's telling the predator, do not waste your metabolic energy trying to chase me because I am already alert and I will easily escape.
And the predator actually listens. It just gives up.
It does, and that is the brilliance of the signal. In that specific moment, the predator and the prey suddenly share a mutual vested interest.
Which is saving energy.
Exactly. The hawk doesn't want to burn precious calories on a high-speed chase that has a low probability of success, and the jay doesn't want to burn its own energy frantically flying away and evading.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the hawk processes the signal, gives up the hunt, and flies off to find a more oblivious target. And the jay stays in its tree and goes back to whatever it was doing.
Wow.
The signal was successful because it altered the receiver's behavior to the sender's benefit.
It's like a biological negotiation. But as I was reading this, a glaring loophole appeared to me.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Well, the entire system relies on honesty. It introduces the massive problem of deception. Because if screaming, I see you, don't chase me, is a guaranteed way to make a predator walk away, why wouldn't a bird just sit in a tree and scream that fake warning all day long?
Just in case something is out there.
Right, just in case. Or, more to the point, what if a bird is sick or weak or has a broken wing? Why wouldn't it give that warning call to trick the predator into thinking it's too fast to catch?
You've isolated the central crisis of signaling theory right there, the problem of the
That's
cheat.
to cheat.
Yeah. In any communication system, if a signal is cheap and easy to produce, the incentive to fake it is overwhelming. The sources highlight a really fascinating example of this deception playing out with fiddler crabs.
Oh, the fiddler crabs are wild.
They really are.
So male fiddler crabs have this one disproportionately giant claw. It's massive compared to their body. And they use it for two things, right? Waving it around to attract females and fighting other males for territory.
It is their primary weapon and their primary status symbol.
Exactly. But the researchers noted that occasionally a crab will lose that giant claw in a fight or to a predator.
Which is a devastating loss of their biological capital, but they have a biological workaround. They can regenerate the limb.
They grow it back, yeah, but there's a catch.
Yeah.
The new claw that grows in looks identical to the old one. It's just as large, just as intimidating, and it takes up the same amount of visual space.
Good.
But it is fundamentally different on the inside. It's significantly lighter, has far less muscle mass, and is structurally much weaker than the original claw.
It is an architectural facade. The crab is engaging in a pure bluff.
Right. It's projecting a visual signal of immense fighting capability, a signal that says, I have a powerful, dangerous opponent. But the underlying reality is that the crab is weak and would likely lose a real physical confrontation.
It's walking around with a giant hollow prop.
Yeah. But here's the evolutionary puzzle. If a crab can successfully bluff and secure territory without actually having to invest the immense metabolic resources to grow dense, heavy muscle, why wouldn't every crab do that?
And that is exactly what evolutionary logic would suggest. If cheating is cheaper and yields the same reward, the cheating gene should spread rapidly through the population.
Makes mathematical sense.
It does. But think about the logical conclusion of that scenario. If every male fiddler crab was walking around with a hollow, useless claw, the signal, the visual size of the claw, would entirely lose its meaning.
Because none of them could actually fight.
Exactly. Crabs would quickly learn that a big claw doesn't correlate to actual physical danger. They would start ignoring the visual signal and simply attack everyone to test their strength.
The signal just breaks down.
The entire communication system would collapse.
Yeah.
Natural selection would eventually weed out the big claws entirely because they no longer served a purpose.
Yet the system hasn't collapsed. Fiddler crabs still rely heavily on claw size to judge opponents and avoid unnecessary fights.
Right.
Which means the bluffing we see is the exception, not the rule. The system remains mostly honest. How does nature enforce that honesty? I mean, if there are no biological police officers auditing the crabs, what prevents the system from being overrun by cheap fakes?
To answer that, we have to look at a concept that completely disrupted the field of evolutionary biology. In 1975, an Israeli biologist named Amos Zahavi proposed a theory that was initially met with intense skepticism.
Okay.
He called it the handicap principle.
The handicap principle. This concept was where the reading started to feel deeply counterintuitive to me.
It really flips your perspective.
Yeah, Zahavi was looking at physical traits that seemed to defy Darwinian logic. The classic example is the peacock's tail.
Right.
If you objectively evaluate a peacock's tail from a perspective of basic survival, it is an abysmal piece of engineering.
It's terrible.
It is incredibly heavy. It is brightly colored, which destroys any chance of camouflage. It requires a staggering amount of nutritional resources to grow.
And most dangerously, it acts like a giant drag parachute when the bird is trying to fly away from a tiger or a leopard.
Exactly. It is quite literally a burden that makes the bird's life harder.
Now, under traditional interpretations of natural selection, a trait that actively lowers an organism's chances of survival should be ruthlessly eliminated over a few generations.
Right, it should just die out.
But Zahavi looked at that heavy, dangerous, metabolically expensive tail and argued something radical. He said the tail isn't an evolutionary mistake. The tail is the point.
Wait, the tail is the point.
Yes. Zahavi's core argument was that for a signal to be inherently trustworthy, it must be costly.
Costly.
It has to be so expensive, so burdensome, or so dangerous that a low-quality, unhealthy individual simply cannot afford to produce it without dying. The signal is reliable precisely because it functions as a handicap.
It is a brilliant inversion of how we normally think about efficiency.
To really grasp it, it helps to look at the analogy Zahavi himself used to explain the concept to his peers. He looked at the world of sports, specifically handicap horse racing.
Oh, I love this analogy. Okay, so in a traditional handicap race, the organizers don't want the fastest horse to just blow past the competition every time. They want a tight, exciting race.
Right, they want a good show.
So the officials assess the quality of the horses. The best, fastest, most genetically gifted horses are literally forced to carry extra lead weights tucked into their saddles.
The intention is to burden the superior athletes, so the slower horses have a fighting chance. It artificially levels the playing field.
But Zahavi pointed out the perspective of the spectator. Imagine you are sitting in the grandstands. You know absolutely nothing about horses. You don't know their bloodlines, their training history, or their previous race times.
You're completely blind to their stats.
Exactly. The only piece of information you are given is how much extra lead weight each horse has been assigned by the judges. Without seeing them run a single step, you can instantly, flawlessly identify the absolute best horse on the track.
It's the one carrying the heaviest handicap.
Right. The immense burden is the undeniable proof of the horse's superior quality.
The handicap guarantees the truth of the signal. Zahavi argued that nature acts like the racing officials. Let's examine another iconic behavioral example from the research to cement this, the phenomenon of stotting in gazelles.
Oh, stotting is fascinating.
It really is.
When a gazelle is grazing on the savannah and it spots a predator, like a lion or a cheetah, its survival instincts trigger. But sometimes, instead of turning and sprinting away as fast as its legs can carry it, which is what you would expect, The gazelle does something entirely different.
Right, it doesn't just run.
It bounds forward relatively slowly and repeatedly launches itself incredibly high, straight up into the air, keeping all four of its legs completely stiff and rigid. It bounces like a pogo stick. That action is called stotting.
Again, observe this from a strictly utilitarian survival standpoint.
Yeah.
You're being hunted by a cheetah, an animal that has evolved to be the fastest land predator on the planet.
A terrifying situation.
Your only defense is speed and distance, and yet you are choosing to expend massive amounts of kinetic energy launching yourself vertically, making zero forward progress, and remaining in the cheetah's line of sight longer than necessary.
It looks like suicidal behavior.
It looks completely irrational. But applying Zahavi's handicap principle, the gazelle isn't panicking. It is executing a highly calculated, honest, and costly broadcast to the cheetah.
What's it broadcasting?
It is saying, look at this display. Look at how much excess, superfluous energy I possess. I am so healthy, my muscles are so strong, and my stamina is so deep that I can afford to waste all of this kinetic energy jumping straight up into the air, and even with this massive handicap, you still will not be able to run me down.
That is just wow. And how does the cheetah process that signal?
The cheetah evaluates the stotting behavior and calculates the odds. It realizes that if a gazelle can afford to burn energy like that, it is genuinely top-tier prey.
It's too much work.
Exactly. A chase would likely end in exhaustion and failure for the cheetah. So the cheetah abandons that specific target and scans the herd for a gazelle that is just desperately, frantically sprinting away, head down.
Because the sprinting gazelle is signaling that it needs every ounce of its energy just to survive.
Right. It can't afford the handicap of the stot.
The cost of the jump is what makes it a fact. If a sick, malnourished, or injured gazelle tried to fake a stot to trick the cheetah, the sheer physical exertion of the jump would exhaust its remaining energy reserves, and it would be caught and eaten instantly.
The deception is physically impossible to maintain.
The penalty for a weak individual faking the signal is death. Therefore, the signal remains mathematically honest across the species.
Precisely.
I want to translate this to human behavior for a second because the sources draw a brilliant parallel to sociology here.
Let's do it.
Under Zahavi's framework, the peacock's tail and the gazelle's jump are basically the biological equivalent of buying a $500,000 Ferrari, but never actually driving it.
Just parking it.
Yeah, you just leave it parked in your driveway, completely exposed to the elements. You aren't using the vehicle for transportation, which is its functional purpose.
Right.
The entire utility of the car is to prove to everyone on your street that you possess so much immense wealth that you can afford to literally waste hundreds of thousands of dollars on a depreciating asset just to let it sit there. The wastefulness is the message.
That is an incredibly accurate translation. The literature explicitly links Zahavi's biological theory to the work of sociologist Thorstein Veblen, who coined the term conspicuous consumption in the late 19th century.
Oh, Veblen.
Yeah. Veblen observed that humans often purchase goods not for their practical use, but specifically because they are expensive and wasteful. The extravagance proves your social rank because a poor person would face financial ruin if they attempted to mimic the purchase.
There's also a literary reference in the sources that I absolutely loved. They mentioned Kurt Vonnegut's famous dystopian short story, Harrison Bergeron.
A classic exploration of enforced equality.
Right. In Vonnegut's fictional universe, the government has mandated that everyone must be perfectly equal in every way. If you are naturally highly intelligent, the government forces you to wear a radio earpiece that violently blasts jarring noises every 20 seconds to shatter your concentration and bring your intellect down to average.
Brutal.
Very. And if you are naturally strong and athletic, you are forced to wear heavy canvas bags filled with lead birdshot padlocked around your neck to weigh you down.
The state imposes artificial handicaps to erase natural advantages.
Exactly. But the narrator of this story is watching a ballet performance on television. The ballerinas are all weighed down with sash weights and bags of birdshot to ensure none of them dance better than anyone else.
Right.
But the narrator notes an inescapable irony. It is still painfully obvious who the most graceful, strongest, and most naturally gifted ballerina is.
How do they know?
Because she is the one who has been burdened with handicap bags that are the size of those worn by 200-pound men. The massive weight designed to hide her physical superiority is the exact thing that loudly broadcasts it to everyone watching. The burden reveals the intrinsic quality.
It's a profound metaphor for Zahavi's theory. The greater the burden an organism can successfully carry, the higher its underlying quality must be.
It is a beautiful, elegant theory. But the text makes it clear that when Zahavi published this in 1975, the scientific establishment did not embrace it.
No, it did not.
In fact, they vehemently attacked it. Many evolutionary biologists essentially looked at Zahavi and said, "You fundamentally misunderstand Darwin. Evolution does not select for waste. It's a ruthless optimizer. It selects for brutal efficiency. Your theory makes absolutely no mathematical sense."
And their skepticism was entirely justified at the time. John Maynard Smith, who was an absolute titan in the field of evolutionary biology, was one of Zahavi's most prominent critics.
What was his issue with it?
Maynard Smith couldn't reconcile the logic. He argued that if a genetic mutation arose that caused a bird to grow a slightly smaller, more efficient tail, that bird would have a massive survival advantage over the peacocks with giant tails.
Makes sense. It's carrying less weight.
Right. It would escape predators easier, need less food, and reproduce more. Over time, the efficient tail gene should inevitably outcompete the wasteful tail gene. Maynard Smith built mathematical models that seemed to prove the handicap principle would inevitably collapse under the pressure of natural selection.
So Zahavi was functionally exiled for over a decade. But then, in 1990, a theoretical biologist named Alan Grafen stepped in. And he completely changed the math.
He really did?
He built sophisticated game theory models that actually proved Zahavi's instinct was correct, but he added a crucial layer of nuance that Maynard Smith had missed. Grafen introduced the concept of marginal cost.
This is where the mechanics of the theory lock into place. Grafen demonstrated that a signaling system is evolutionarily stable if the marginal cost of producing the signal is significantly lower for a high-quality individual than it is for a low-quality individual.
Okay, let's pause and translate marginal cost for the listener, because that sounds like an economics lecture. But it is vital to understanding how this works.
It's easier than it sounds.
Let's step away from biology and use money. Imagine two people. Person A is a tech billionaire with a net worth of $10 billion. Person B is a middle-class worker with a total life savings of $10,000.
Okay, vast wealth disparity.
Yes. Now, let's say the signal they want to buy is a luxury watch that costs $10,000.
The absolute cost of the watch is identical for both of them, $10,000.
Right. The price tag doesn't change.
Right.
But the marginal cost, the impact of that purchase relative to their total resources, is vastly different.
Huge difference.
For the billionaire, spending $10,000 is a rounding error.
Right.
It doesn't affect their lifestyle, their ability to buy food, or their financial security. The marginal cost is near zero.
Right.
But for the middle-class worker, buying that exact same watch requires liquidating their entire life savings. The marginal cost is catastrophic. It leaves them highly vulnerable if an emergency happens.
That is precisely what Grafen modeled in biology. Let's bring it back to the peacock. Growing a massive tail requires an immense amount of metabolic energy and a highly robust immune system to fight off the parasites that are attracted to the feathers.
So it's expensive.
Very. For a peacock that won the genetic lottery one, that is naturally strong, incredibly healthy, and excellent at foraging for food, diverting a large chunk of energy to grow the tail, is like the billionaire buying the watch.
Yeah, okay.
It's expensive, but they have so much surplus energy that it doesn't threaten their overall survival.
But for a genetically inferior, sickly peacock that struggles to find enough calories just to survive the day, trying to divert enough energy to grow that same massive tail would be biologically bankrupting.
Exactly.
It would weaken their immune system so much that they would likely die from a minor infection before they ever got a chance to mate. The absolute cost of the tail is the same in calories, but the marginal cost is lethal for the weak bird.
Exactly. Grafen proved mathematically that the signal remains honest because the lower quality individuals simply cannot afford the marginal cost of faking it.
But the science didn't freeze in 1990. I was reading the newer research cited in our sources, specifically the work of biologists like Sabalks, Zamadow, and Dustin Penn, who have recently reevaluated Grafen's math.
And they offer a really interesting critique.
They point out a flaw in how we interpret the handicap principle. They argue that Grafen's models were brilliant, but they were largely misunderstood, sometimes even by Grafen himself.
Yeah, they suggest a paradigm shift.
Right. They suggest that honest signals don't actually have to be wasteful, and they don't have to function as a literal handicap at their evolutionary equilibrium.
This is a subtle but monumental shift in how we understand animal communication. Zamadow and Penn, propose that what maintains the honesty of a signal is not the heavy cost actually paid by the honest, high-quality individual.
Then what maintains it?
Rather, the honesty is maintained by the potential cost that would be inflicted on a dishonest, low-quality individual if they attempted to cheat.
Okay, my brain just stuttered. If it's not a handicap, how is it honest? What is the difference between an actual cost and a potential cost?
Let's re-examine our billionaire and the watch. Under the traditional handicap principle, the watch is seen as a massive waste of money.
Right, Veldon's conspicuous consumption.
But Samadow and Penn would argue that for the billionaire, the watch isn't wasteful at all. The billionaire isn't suffering. They are actually being highly efficient with their abundant resources, converting surplus cash into social status with minimal effort.
Oh.
The system isn't selecting for waste.
It's maintained by trade-offs. The high-quality individual isn't burdened by the signal. They are uniquely equipped to carry it effortlessly.
Yes. The crucial mechanism that prevents the system from collapsing into deception isn't that the truth is painful to tell, it's that the lie is too dangerous to attempt.
So the threat is what works.
Exactly. The potential cheater, the middle-class worker in our analogy, or the sickly peacock, faces an unbearable vulnerability if they try to deploy the signal. The threat of that devastating cost is what keeps them from faking it. Natural selection is still rigorously selecting for efficiency. It has simply engineered an efficiency that only the strong can access without dying.
That reframing changes everything. It means nature isn't inherently wasteful. It's just incredibly strict about auditing who has access to certain signals.
That's a very rigorous auditor.
So we've established that animals use these incredibly intricate, energetically expensive, and potentially dangerous signals to prove their genetic fitness to mates or to predators. The costs guarantee the truth.
Yes, that's the baseline.
But I want to pivot this entire framework to us. Because you and I are sitting here having this conversation, and neither of us has iridescent feathers growing out of our backs.
Thankfully, no.
And we don't bounce stiff-legged into the air when we hear a siren. How does this evolutionary poker game translate to human behavior? How do we signal our hidden qualities?
Well, humans obviously don't have morphological handicaps like antlers or giant claws, but we have evolved complex behaviors and cultural practices that function through the exact same mechanism.
Like what?
We engage in what anthropologists call costly signals. And to observe this in its most unfiltered form, the sources examine traditional hunter-gatherer societies, where the costs and benefits of behavior are literally measured in life, death, and daily caloric survival. Let's look closely at the Miriam people of the Torres Strait in Australia and their practice of turtle hunting.
Okay, the Miriam turtle hunters. This study completely dismantled how I thought about foraging and survival.
It's a great case study.
The backdrop here is that in the Miriam community, successfully hunting large sea turtles grants a man immense social prestige. It is the pinnacle of masculine achievement.
Highly respected.
But when researchers actually crunched the numbers on the caloric reality of turtle hunting, it made absolutely zero logical sense.
It is a statistical paradox. If a Miriam man's primary goal is simply to acquire the maximum amount of food for his family while expending the least amount of effort and exposing himself to the least amount of risk, which is what basic survival theory dictates he should do, he should never hunt turtles.
Right. What should he do instead?
He should spend his days foraging for shellfish on the shallow reefs. Shellfish gathering is incredibly safe, the yield is highly predictable, and the caloric return on the time invested is very high.
But turtle hunting is the opposite of all of that. It requires venturing out into deep, dangerous waters. It requires immense physical strength, coordinated teamwork, deep knowledge of the tides and the animal's behavior, and high-level physical endurance.
It's risky.
It is dangerous. And mathematically, after you account for the massive amount of energy burned during the hunt, the net calories yielded per hour of effort are actually lower than if the hunter had just stayed near the shore picking up clams.
It is a highly inefficient way to acquire calories. But the paradox deepens when you look at what happens after a successful hunt.
This is the crazy part.
When a Miriam hunter brings a massive sea turtle back to the island, he does not butcher it and store the meat in his family's larder to ensure they survive the winter.
Which you'd expect.
The meat is prepared for a large, public, communal feast. The hunter distributes the high-quality protein indiscriminately to the entire community. He essentially gives the hard-earned resources away.
Which completely shatters the older anthropological models I learned in school, like delayed reciprocity.
Yes, that old theory.
The old idea was that Early humans only shared food with the unspoken contract that the person they fed today would feed them tomorrow when they were hungry. It was an insurance policy. But the researchers point out that these Miriam hunters are giving prime meat to the elderly, to children, to people who possess zero hunting skills and will literally never be able to repay the caloric debt. So why do it? Why take on the physical danger, run a mathematical caloric deficit, and then give the prize away?
Because the goal of the hunt was never calories. The goal was the broadcast. The turtle is a human key cocktail.
They're hunting for status.
Precisely. They are engaging in a costly behavioral signal. The hunt itself is a highly visible stage. The communal feast ensures that every single member of the society knows exactly who the successful hunters are.
Everybody sees it.
By voluntarily absorbing a massive cost, the time, the physical danger, the energy expenditure, the hunter is sending an unfakeable signal about his phenotypic quality.
Let's define phenotypic quality for a second, just to be clear. You were talking about the underlying invisible traits that make him a high-value human, right?
Yes. His phenotype is the observable expression of his genetics. By catching the turtle, he is providing undeniable proof that he possesses superior physical strength, excellent hand-eye coordination, acute vision, high intelligence required for navigation, and the courage to face danger.
You can't fake it.
Exactly. A weak or incompetent man could not fake catching a sea turtle.
And what is the payout for sending that signal? If he is running a caloric deficit, he must be gaining something else of immense value.
The evolutionary payout is profound. The researchers documented that successful Miriam turtle hunters acquire massive social benefits. They hold higher status in the community's political structure. People defer to them.
They get the respect.
And crucially, from a Darwinian perspective, they experience significantly greater reproductive success. They marry earlier, they acquire higher quality mates, and they often have more offspring than men who only forage for shellfish. The cost of the meat is effectively converted into genetic legacy.
There is another example in the text, from a different part of the world, that illustrates the sheer extremity of human costly signaling even better. The torch fishers of the Ifaluke Atoll in Micronesia.
Oh, the dog-toothed tuna hunters. This is a brilliant example of how culture ritualizes the handicap to ensure everyone sees this signal.
The preparation required just to be allowed to participate in torch fishing is borderline fanatical. The men who want to do this cannot just wake up and go fishing. They have to adhere to strict, highly visible behavioral constraints.
Very demanding constraints.
They have to physically isolate themselves from the rest of the village. They must take all of their meals at a designated public canoe house. They are essentially required to pull themselves completely out of normal domestic and economic life just to prepare for the first day of the brief torch fishing season.
And much like the Miriam turtle hunters, the Ifaluke torch fishing results in a net caloric loss. The preparation and the method are wildly inefficient from a pure survival standpoint.
So why do the ritual?
Because the inefficiency is the entire point. The ritualization is the amplifier for the signal. Because they isolate at the public canoe house, and because they must strictly follow these visible public rules, the entire community is acutely aware of exactly who is and who isn't a dedicated torch fisher.
The text described it as an unfakeable signal of work ethic.
That is the crucial takeaway. On a remote atoll like Ifaluke, society operates with a strict division of labor, and the survival of the group depends heavily on individual industriousness. You cannot afford to partner with a lazy person.
Right, survival is too tenuous.
The women on Ifaluke explicitly state in interviews that they are searching for the most industrious mates. Torch fishing is an incredibly expensive, exhausting, highly public broadcast that screams, "I possess an unparalleled capacity for hard work. I am the most industrious man on this island."
Okay, so that makes perfect sense in a traditional hunter-gatherer context where physical survival is a daily challenge. But it made me think about our modern world.
How so?
Well, most of us aren't hunting sea turtles or isolating in canoe houses. When we see young guys today participating in extreme, sports-free solo rock climbing, base jumping off buildings, or reckless motorcycle racing on public highways, is that the exact same biological software running?
It is the exact same software, simply executing in a modern environment.
Yeah.
Taking voluntary physical risks, especially heroic risks that require skill, or reckless risks that demonstrate fearlessness, is a primal way of signaling physical vitality, bravery, and the ability to navigate dangerous, high-stress situations without panicking.
Wow.
The danger is the cost that validates the signal of their fitness. But the literature expands this beyond just physical danger. Think about a completely benign modern activity, voluntary blood donation.
Donating blood, I don't see the connection. Donating blood is a quiet, sterile medical procedure? How is that functionally the same as a peacock tail or jumping out of an airplane?
Analyze the hidden costs of the action. Donating a pint of blood requires a sacrifice of your personal time. It involves a degree of physical pain when the needle is inserted. There is a small but real risk of infection or syncope fainting. But most importantly, it is biologically costly. You are literally draining vital oxygen-carrying fluid from your body, which your metabolism then has to work overtime to replace.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Let millions of people do it regularly, and what happens when they finish? They are almost always given a brightly colored sticker or a specific bandage to wear, which publicly broadcasts to everyone they encounter for the rest of the day.
I donated blood.
We're the cost.
They do. And psychological research confirms the efficacy of this signal. Studies show that when people see someone wearing a blood donation sticker, they subconsciously perceive that person as being physically healthier, more emotionally generous, and more capable of handling physiological stress than a non-donor.
That's amazing.
The minor physical handicap of losing blood proves their underlying biological surplus.
Which opens up a massive and slightly uncomfortable avenue of thought in the sources. The idea that generosity itself, the very concept of altruism, is actually just a sophisticated competitive status play. It is a bit confronting.
The text introduces a concept called the competitive altruism hypothesis by researchers Hardy and Van Vuck. And I have to admit, when I first read it, it felt deeply cynical. But the deeper you go, the more undeniable the logic becomes.
It does challenge our idealized notions of human goodness. The competitive altruism hypothesis suggests that within social groups, individuals are actively, though often subconsciously, competing to be perceived as the most generous, nicest person in the room.
Why do they care?
Because in complex human societies, the act of giving away valuable resources, whether that resource is your money, your free time, or your expertise, grants you immense social prestige.
Right. If I am out to dinner with a group of colleagues and I quietly pick up the incredibly expensive tab for the entire table, I am out several $100s.
Yeah.
I've taken a financial hit. But in exchange, I have instantly elevated my status in the eyes of everyone sitting there. I become the preferred interaction partner. My colleagues want to be around me, they want to collaborate with me on projects, and they trust me more because they have empirical proof that I am willing to bear a cost for the benefit of the group.
And what's fascinating is how malleable this behavior is depending on the audience. The sources detail a highly revealing study by Bogle and his colleagues that examined the intersection of sexual selection and altruistic behavior. They set up an experiment using economic games.
Oh, I was looking at the methodology of that study, and the way they isolated the variables is brilliant.
It's very clever.
They had participants play these games where they were given financial stakes, and they had to make a choice. They could act selfishly and keep the money for themselves, or they could distribute the stakes cooperatively, acting altruistically toward the other players.
The architecture of the experiment was designed to test whether altruism fluctuates based on mating motives. Before making their financial decisions, the male participants were primed by being shown specific images.
So if competitive altruism is truly functioning as a biological mating display, like a peacock spreading its feathers, I imagine their financial generosity completely shifted depending on exactly whose face was on the screen in front of them.
The shift was statistically massive. When male participants were viewing images of highly attractive women, they distributed significantly higher financial stakes to the other players.
No way.
Yes. They became far more cooperative and altruistic compared to when they were shown images of unattractive women or when they were shown no images at all. The presence of a high-quality potential mate triggered a dramatic increase in the costly signal of generosity. Altruism was weaponized as a mating display.
So, to synthesize this, when I spend my entire Saturday helping a friend move heavy furniture up 3 flights of stairs, or when I conspicuously drop a $20 bill into a charity bucket while I'm walking down the street on a first date, my biological hardware is essentially just performing the human equivalent of a gazelle jumping stiff-legged in the air.
Pretty much.
I am unconsciously signaling to my date or my social circle that I possess such a vast abundance of resources, whether that is physical energy, surplus wealth, or emotional bandwidth, that I can afford to just throw it away on someone else.
If we strip away the cultural narrative and look at the underlying evolutionary mechanics, yes, that is exactly what you are doing. But I want to offer an important caveat here because it's crucial not to fall into a trap of pure cynicism.
Please do.
This mechanism operates below the level of conscious thought. When you help your friend move, your subjective experience is genuine affection and a desire to help. You genuinely care about the charity. You aren't consciously plotting to manipulate your date.
The feeling is real, even if the evolutionary origin is strategic.
Exactly. The pertinent question is why evolution wired our brains to feel genuine pleasure when we help others, and why we care so deeply that our social group witnesses our helpfulness.
Why do we care?
Evolutionary anthropologists argue it's because costly altruism solves one of the most dangerous problems that plagued early human societies: the problem of free riders.
Let's define the free rider problem. These are the individuals who eagerly take the benefits of group living, but refuse to contribute to the costs.
Precisely. They are the parasites of the social structure. As human societies grew from small, tightly knit family bands into larger, more complex tribes, it became increasingly easy to cheat the system.
How so?
A free rider is the guy who happily eats the communal Merriam turtle meat at the feast, but whenever it's time to go out on the dangerous boats, he suddenly has a stomachache. If a society has too many free riders, the cooperative system collapses and the group dies out.
So a large society desperately needs a reliable audit system to identify who is truly committed to the survival of the group and who is just faking it to get free food.
And costly altruism acts as that exact filter. If an individual is willing to incur a massive, painful cost for the benefit of the group, whether that's risking their life in a hunt, giving away their wealth, or spending their free time building a communal shelter, they provide unfakeable proof that they are not a free rider. Their investment is too high.
The sources take this concept of the costly filter and apply it to an area I never would have expected: the evolution of religion. It completely reframed how I view extreme religious practices.
It is one of the most robust applications of signaling theory in modern anthropology. Researchers like Richard Sosis and William Irons have built compelling models arguing that strict, highly demanding religious rituals evolved specifically as a mechanism to maintain deep intergroup cooperation and weed out the free riders.
Because if you look at the landscape of global religions, especially historically, many of the requirements seem designed to be as difficult and unpleasant as possible.
Consider the demands. Many faiths require adherents to give up 10% or more of their gross income as a tithe. They mandate grueling, month-long periods of daytime fasting where you cannot eat or drink water.
That's a huge sacrifice.
They require repetitive, time-consuming daily prayers. In some extreme sects, they require painful body modifications, public self-flagellation, or handling highly venomous snakes during worship services.
None of which makes sense if the goal of the organism is just physical comfort and survival. But under signaling theory, the pain is the password.
The pain is the password. I like that.
If joining a community requires you to forfeit a huge chunk of your wealth, starve yourself for 30 days, or risk a lethal snake bite, a cynical free rider who just wants access to the community's mutual aid network is not going to do it. The cost of faking the religious belief is simply too agonizing.
The ritual functions as an impenetrable barrier to fakers, and the psychological result of that barrier is profound. The people who do successfully perform these costly rituals look around the room at their fellow adherents and know, with absolute mathematical certainty, every single person in this room is 100% committed to this group and this ideology.
Because if they weren't, they would have quit when it got painful.
Exactly. That shared crucible of costly signaling generates immense, unbreakable trust and solidarity. It creates a group that is incredibly cohesive, highly cooperative, and fiercely resilient in the face of external threats. The deliberate handicap is the engine that creates the social trust.
Okay, this creates a fascinating pivot point in our deep dive. We've established that extreme generosity, agonizing rituals, and sacrificial altruism are incredibly effective ways to prove your worth, climb the social ladder, and build deep trust.
Yes.
But they require an actual painful sacrifice. They cost time, money, calories, or physical safety. But humans possess a highly developed neocortex. We are incredibly clever, calculating creatures. What if human beings figured out a way to hack the system?
Oh, we definitely did.
What if we found a way to reap the massive status rewards of being perceived as a good, moral person without actually having to pay the heavy cost of doing good, moral things? What if we figured out how to fake the peacock tail?
And that question leads us directly into the dark side of human social signaling. We are moving from the honest, costly signals of the physical world into the cheap, toxic illusions of modern discourse.
Right.
A phenomenon that contemporary philosophers have defined as moral grandstanding.
Moral grandstanding. I feel like anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes scrolling through a social media feed knows exactly what this feels like in their bones, even if they didn't have the precise academic vocabulary to describe it.
Oh, we've all seen it.
Our primary source for this is an extensive review of a book authored by philosophers Justin Tosi and Brandon Warmke. Let's ground this. What is their exact philosophical definition of moral grandstanding?
Tosi and Warmke approach this very precisely. They define moral grandstanding as the use of moral talk, which means publicly engaging in discourse about ethics, justice, right and wrong, for the primary overriding purpose of impressing an audience with your own moral qualities.
Okay.
The behavior is driven by a specific psychological engine they call the recognition desire.
The recognition desire. So, to translate that, if I see an injustice occurring and I choose to speak out publicly against it, I'm not actually speaking out because I am desperate to solve the underlying injustice. I am speaking out because I am desperate for you, the audience, to recognize that I am a morally respectable, enlightened person.
That is the core of it. Or, even more commonly, you are speaking out to prove that you are morally superior to the people around you. It is a profound expression of personal vanity that wears the camouflage of public concern. And Tosi and Warmke are careful to stipulate the parameters. For a statement to qualify as grandstanding, the recognition desire has to be a dominant motivating factor. If you posted an impassioned plea about a social issue and absolutely nobody liked it, shared it, or praised you for it, and you felt deeply disappointed by that lack of applause, you are grandstanding.
This concept seems intuitive, but as I was reading the breakdown, it gets incredibly epistemologically complicated very quickly. Because grandstanding isn't necessarily about lying.
Right, that's a common misconception.
What if the statement the person makes is factually, objectively true? For example, I used to work in a corporate environment, and there was always that one person who would hit reply all to a massive department-wide email chain, just to point out a tiny, insignificant compliance error that someone made.
I know exactly the type.
Their email might say, I just want to ensure we are strictly adhering to Section 4B of the Employee Handbook, as I am deeply committed to our corporate integrity. That might be a factually true statement. They might actually be committed to it. Does the truth of the statement mean it isn't grandstanding?
This is where the philosophical framework becomes a brilliant analytical tool. To understand why that passive-aggressive corporate email is toxic, we have to separate the communication into three completely distinct layers.
What are they?
The semantic truth of the statement, what the speaker is attempting to convey, and what the audience actually infers from it.
Okay, let's break those three layers down using that email example, or the example they use in the book. Someone posting, I am unusually sensitive to human rights abuses.
Let's use the human rights post. Layer 1 is the semantic truth statement. I am unusually sensitive to human rights abuses. The semantic truth might be yes. They might donate to Amnesty International. They might read the news and feel genuine sadness. Factually, the words are accurate.
So the foundation isn't a lie.
Correct. But layer 2 is where the grandstanding occurs. What is the speaker attempting to convey by publicly broadcasting this fact? They aren't just sharing data.
Right. What's the subtext?
The subtext they're trying to inject into the minds of their audience is, I am a much better, more empathetic person than all of you who are staying silent. Or, I belong in the elite high-status tier of our political tribe, and I demand you recognize my rank.
The transmission is about status, not the issue. And then layer 3 is where it often backfires.
Yeah.
What does the audience actually infer?
Because the audience is not passive, they are actively reading the invisible signals. The speaker hopes the audience infers, wow, what an incredibly noble, courageous person.
Which rarely happens.
Very rarely. Because humans are highly attuned to cheat signals. The audience reads the post and infers, this person is pathetically vain and desperate for attention. The audience's inference operates totally independently of the speaker's original intent or the literal dictionary definition of the words used.
The sources mention that sometimes the audience infers something even darker. If a celebrity with a known history of terrible behavior suddenly posts a long, flowery essay about their deep commitment to social justice, the audience doesn't infer nobility. They infer this is calculated PR crisis management masquerading as morality. They're trying to trick us.
Exactly. The audience recognizes the hollow claw of the fiddler crab. But while it's easy to mock the vanity of it, Tosi and Warmke argue that we shouldn't dismiss grandstanding as just an annoying personality quirk.
Why not?
We need to look at the macro behavioral effects of this recognition desire, because when it scales up across a society, it actively destroys the fabric of public discourse.
Because it triggers a signaling arms race.
Precisely. Remember Zahavi, if expressing moral outrage grants you social status, then to get more status than the person next to you, you have to appear more moral than them. But in a society where almost everyone agrees on the baseline morals, for instance, everyone agrees that stealing is bad, you don't gain any status points for standing up and declaring stealing is bad.
It's too cheap a signal. Everyone has it.
So to stand out, to grow a bigger, brighter peacock tail, you have to innovate. You have to comb through society to find a new, obscure thing to be outraged about.
Oh, wow.
Or if you can't find a new issue, you have to express your outrage over the old issue more violently, more aggressively, and with more extreme rhetoric than anyone else has dared to use.
Which explains the playbook of modern internet culture perfectly. The text lists the destructive behaviors this arms race inevitably creates. People are forced into taking extreme maximalist positions that are wildly out of proportion to the actual facts on the ground.
Yes.
You see people accusing others of heinous, career-ending moral crimes when the person barely did anything wrong or perhaps just misspoke. It fuels the machinery of public shaming and the digital pile-on.
It incentivizes the performance of fake, weaponized disgust. People use rhetoric that suggests intense, visceral hatred when the actual event they're discussing doesn't objectively warrant that level of emotional destruction.
It's just exhausting.
And most damagingly, it leads to the outright dismissal of thoughtful, nuanced opponents who might actually have a valid counterargument. You cannot engage in a calm debate with an opponent if your primary goal is to perform a display of moral purity for your own tribe.
The cost to society is massive. The reviewer of the book, Russell Blackford, points out how this arms race fundamentally distorts our entire cognitive map of reality.
It really does.
It creates a toxic environment where thoughtful, less aggressive, more nuanced people are simply intimidated into silence. They opt out of the game. So if you look at the public square or scroll through a social media feed, you are left with the illusion that everyone holds these intensely extreme, highly polarized views.
Right.
You believe the country is violently divided, when in reality that division is just a false map created by a loud minority of rival grandstanders competing for status.
It creates a catastrophic illusion of polarization that we then base our political decisions on. But Blackford, in his review, also brings up a really vital, highly practical caveat, and it serves as a brilliant pushback against Tosi and Warmke's framework.
Which is?
He asks the foundational question. In the real world, outside of a philosophy seminar, how do we actually know when someone is grandstanding?
Because you can't read minds. You cannot see the recognition desire.
Exactly. The internal motivation is completely opaque. Let's say you observe someone on the internet expressing extreme vitriolic outrage, demanding that someone be fired, and piling on a target of public shaming. Tosi and Warmke might label that grandstanding.
Oh, maybe it isn't.
Blackford points out that this person might not be vain at all. They might be a genuine zealot. They might truly, deeply, with every fiber of their being, believe the extreme, maximalist things they are saying.
And to be fair to humanity, we all experience genuine, uncalculated outrage sometimes. If you witness a horrific human rights abuse or blatant corruption, you're going to feel intensely angry, and you are going to express that anger. The mere act of expressing strong moral conviction does not automatically make you a grandstander.
It does not. The line between righteous anger and vain grandstanding is drawn entirely by the internal motivation, which is invisible to the observer. And because of that invisibility, Tosi and Warmke offer a very specific and highly counterintuitive piece of advice on how we should deal with grandstanding in our daily lives.
What's the advice?
They conclude that you should never publicly accuse someone else of moral grandstanding.
Wait, let's pause on that. Because my immediate instinct, and I think the instinct of most people listening, is the exact opposite. If we recognize that grandstanding is a toxic, manipulative behavior that is actively destroying public discourse, shouldn't we have a duty to call it out? Shouldn't we comment, hey, stop virtue signaling, you just want attention?
It feels like the right thing to do, but think deeply about the mechanics of making that accusation.
Yeah.
When you stand up in a public forum and accuse someone else of moral grandstanding, what are you actually doing?
You're calling them out.
But you are publicly declaring to the audience that you are perceptive enough to see through their vanity. You are declaring that you are above such petty, ego-driven behavior. You are positioning yourself as the sole, enlightened arbiter of pure, authentic
Oh,
motives.
wow. The trap closes. Calling out grandstanding is, by definition, just another form of moral grandstanding. You are hijacking their vanity to instantly boost your own status as the wise truth teller.
It is an inescapable paradox. Engaging with it simply injects more noise, more vanity, and more conflict into an already polluted ecosystem. And I want to be incredibly explicit here, applying our rule of strict impartiality regarding the sources.
Right.
This behavior is categorically not confined to any single political ideology. The literature shows that left-wing, right-wing, centrist, and completely apolitical groups all utilize moral grandstanding to establish status hierarchies within their specific in-groups. It is a fundamental flaw in human evolutionary software, not a political strategy.
So if we are trapped in a system where calling it out makes us guilty of it, what is the actual solution proposed? How do we disarm it?
Yeah. Tosi and Warmke suggest that the only philosophically and socially safe ground is to rigorously lead by example. We cannot police the motives of others, but we can police our own. We have to actively resist our own biological impulses to grandstand.
That's harder than it sounds.
It takes practice. We must interrogate our own recognition desire before we speak in a meeting. Before we hit reply on that email and before we post online, we have to ask ourselves, am I saying this to solve a problem, or am I saying this to look good?
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the hierarchy we've built. Whether an individual earned their high status through honest, genuinely costly altruism like carrying the heavy handicap of the Merriam-Hunter, or whether they successfully faked their way to the top through the cheap talk and illusions of moral grandstanding, eventually the dust settles and a hierarchy solidifies.
Yes, someone ends up at the apex.
But how do the rest of us actually know who that is when they walk into a room? Before anyone even speaks, how do our brains instantly spot the boss?
That transitions us perfectly into the fascinating world of status cues across species. Because our brains are incredibly fine-tuned, incredibly rapid pattern recognition machines designed to pick up on who holds power,
Operating totally in the background.
often entirely below our conscious awareness.
The sources take us back to our primate cousins here, looking at the shared traits between humans and monkeys. And the baseline cues are exactly what your intuition would suggest. Physical body size, observable muscle strength, and the presence of testosterone.
Yes, but the literature demands we be highly careful with how we interpret testosterone. Popular culture often views it as a simple, linear cause high testosterone equals dominant behavior. While it certainly influences status-seeking drive, the biological relationship is actually profoundly bidirectional.
Right, I highlighted this caveat. The sources point out that your testosterone levels don't just predict if you will win, they actually rise as a direct result of winning a conflict. If you play a grueling tennis match and win, or if you successfully negotiate a massive promotion at work, your endocrine system rewards you with a significant testosterone surge. It is a biological reinforcement mechanism, a reward for navigating the hierarchy successfully, not just a static baseline predictor of who the boss is.
It is a dynamic chemical feedback loop. Now, when we move from general primate traits to human-specific physical cues, the data reveals some surprising biases. Height is a massive, incredibly consistent cue.
It really is.
We touched on this concept earlier, but the statistics are staggering. Historically, taller presidential candidates have a significant, measurable advantage in winning the popular vote. In the corporate world, taller men consistently earn higher median wages than their shorter peers, even when controlling for education and experience.
Our brains essentially correlate physical elevation with social elevation, and the facial features data is wild. The sources note that receding hairlines, which we usually associate with aging, are actually processed by the brain as a strong cue for seniority, experience, and dominance.
It implies survival and wisdom.
But the most universally recognized physical cue is facial masculinity. And crucially, the text notes this applies to both men and women.
Yes. The specific architectural features, a wider jawline, thinner lips, more pronounced, and heavy brow ridges, are universally perceived by observers as highly dominant. And acoustic cues are just as powerful. Vocal pitch plays a huge role. Both men and women who naturally possess or artificially adopt lower-pitched voices are consistently rated as more dominant, more competent, and more authoritative by listeners.
but obviously humans aren't just static photographs. It's
Yeah.
not just how your jaw is shaped, it's how you move through space. The behavioral cues are where it gets really granular. The sources list an open, physically expanded posture, taking up more physical space in a chair or at a table than is strictly necessary, speaking rapidly and decisively.
And the strategic use of interruption. High-status individuals interrupt others far more frequently, and they tend to maintain a significantly smaller interpersonal distance. They stand closer to people, invading personal space without hesitation. But here, the psychological literature makes a vitally important distinction about the actual flavor or style of dominance being projected, because you do not have to be a tyrant to be the boss.
Right, the sources break the concept of dominance down into two distinct categories: sociable dominance versus aggressive dominance.
Aggressive dominance is the archetype we typically picture when we hear the word boss. It relies on antisocial, coercive behavior. It involves deceit, explicit or implicit threats, frequent loud interruptions, and evasion of responsibility. It is using raw interpersonal friction to force your way to the top of the pile.
Sounds exhausting to work for.
It is. But sociable dominance is an entirely different strategy. It involves exhibiting genuine expertise. It involves giving your opinions freely but calmly, being highly assertive but remaining cooperative with the group. It is characterized by maintaining high, steady eye contact while speaking, rather than shouting.
And there is a third, completely distinct category mentioned in the literature that operates outside of dominance entirely: prestige.
Yes. This is a crucial separation. Dominance, whether it is the aggressive or the sociable variant, always involves some underlying level of force, assertiveness, or the threat of penalty. Prestige, however, is a form of high status that is granted freely and voluntarily by the group.
So it's earned, not forced.
Exactly. It is awarded because an individual possesses highly valued, rare skills, deep knowledge, or a history of massive altruism. You defer to an aggressively dominant boss because you fear being fired. You defer to a brilliant, prestigious scientist, not because they can physically intimidate you, but because you genuinely want to learn from their expertise.
Okay, so we are constantly, subconsciously scanning our environment for these specific cues: the height, the pitch of the voice, the expanded posture, the displays of expertise. But the extent to which our brains are fundamentally hijacked by these cues is terrifying. To illustrate this, we have to talk about the monkey juice experiment.
Oh, this is a landmark study conducted by Robert Diener and his colleagues at Duke University. It brilliantly and somewhat comically demonstrates exactly how much raw biological value our primate brains place on witnessing status.
I absolutely love the design of this study. Okay, so Diener and his team took male rhesus macaque monkeys and placed them in a controlled environment where they were given a simple choice. They could look at a blank computer screen, and in return, they would receive a squirt of sweet fruit juice. For a monkey, fruit juice is a high-value currency. It is a direct caloric reward.
Right. And the researchers first established a strict baseline. They figured out exactly how much juice a monkey required to consistently choose to look at the blank screen. Then they introduced a new variable. They started flashing images on the screen.
So now the monkey sits down, and it has a choice. Option A, look at a blank square and get the standard baseline amount of delicious juice. Option B, look at a photograph of another monkey from their own social troop and get a slightly different amount of juice. And what they found is that the monkeys would literally pay out of their own pockets to look at the high-status males.
Yes, the behavior was undeniable. The monkeys would happily, voluntarily accept a significantly smaller squirt of juice, meaning they were actively sacrificing valuable calories just for the visual privilege of looking at a photograph of the alpha male of their group.
It's as if we are hardwired to be paparazzi. We are willing to pay a literal biological currency just to stare at the celebrities of our social group.
The magnetic pull of the alpha is that strong. But the flip side of the experiment is even more revealing about how we value the bottom of the hierarchy. What happened when the researchers flashed a picture of a low-status, subordinate, weak male on the screen?
The monkeys demanded to be overpaid. They flat out refused to look at the low-status monkey unless the researchers actively bribed them with extra juice to make up for the unpleasantness of looking at a loser.
Exactly. Staring at low status requires compensation. And we see the exact same involuntary, hardwired visual attention mechanism operating in humans, just minus the fruit juice reward.
How so?
In cognitive psychology, it is called gaze cueing. If you put a human subject in a lab and show them a photograph of a face looking sharply to the left or the right, the subject's own eyes will involuntarily automatically dart to follow the gaze of the face on the screen.
We instinctively want to look at whatever they're looking at.
Yes, it's a shared attention mechanism. But the crucial finding is that humans are significantly more likely and much faster to follow the gaze of a high-status individual than a low-status one. And tying back to what we discussed about faked signals, this involuntary gaze cueing happens even if the status is entirely fabricated by the researchers. If I bring you into a lab and show you two photographs of the exact same structurally identical face, but I lie and tell you that face A belongs to a high-powered billionaire CEO and face B belongs to an unemployed, struggling intern, your visual system will automatically, effortlessly track the gaze of the CEO and largely ignore the intern.
Which raises an incredibly important foundational question. Why? Why is our visual attention so deeply, involuntarily hijacked by status? Why does evolution care who I look at?
Because misreading the hierarchy is a matter of life and death. If you are a lower status individual, which most of us are in most hierarchies, you incur a massively greater cost if you fail to notice what the alpha is doing.
That makes sense.
If you don't know where the boss is looking, you might accidentally challenge them, you might miss a threat they are reacting to, or you might fail to mimic a behavior that could earn you favor. You need to know exactly where the power resides in the room at all times just to survive socially.
Which perfectly explains another deeply weird, almost arrogant finding in the sources. The higher your own personal status is within a group, the worse you become at perceiving the dominance cues in other people.
Yes. It is a psychological privilege of power. If you are the alpha, if you sit at the absolute top of the hierarchy, you simply do not need to burn cognitive calories hyper-analyzing everyone else's posture, vocal pitch, and microexpressions because fundamentally, they are not a threat to you.
So you just tune it out.
Subordinates must be elite experts in reading the room. The boss can afford the luxury of being completely oblivious.
That is deeply unsettling, the idea that power makes you blind to the people below you. But as we move into the final section of our sources, it gets significantly worse. Because it's not just our eyeballs that are hijacked by the hierarchy. The research demonstrates that your actual localized position in the hierarchy literally alters how your brain functions on a chemical and structural level.
It changes everything.
It changes your working memory, your capacity for empathy, and even your basic measurable intelligence.
And this transition brings us into the hard neuroscience of the deep dive. We are moving from observing the psychological behaviors of status into mapping the actual neural architecture that generates them. We need to examine the cognitive and neural cost of the hierarchy.
Let's start by looking at the cognitive tax of being at the bottom, because this specific finding blew my mind. The data shows that being ranked low in a group setting doesn't just make you feel sad or socially anxious, it temporarily, measurably lowers your IQ.
Yes. The neurological research here is stark, particularly in studies that test executive function.
Let's define executive function for the listener, because that's a broad term.
Executive function refers to the high-level cognitive processes in your prefrontal cortex. It includes your working memory, your cognitive flexibility, and your inhibitory control.
So the heavy lifting of the brain.
Exactly. It's the processing power you use to update complex information in real time, plan multi-step strategies, and suppress impulsive reactions. And the studies show a dramatic effect. When researchers place human participants into a group dynamic and then explicitly publicly rank them low, perhaps by showing them they scored poorly on a preliminary fake intelligence test compared to the others, their performance on subsequent complex executive function tasks plummets.
It functions as a cognitive load. Just the sheer psychological awareness that you are the lowest ranked, least valued person in the room actively drains your mental processing power. You are burning RAM, just worrying about your status.
It is a phenomenon closely related to the audience effect, where human performance fluctuates when being observed. Now, under intense group pressure or observation, everyone's performance might dip slightly initially. But the neurological data shows that high-status individuals possess the cognitive resilience to recover and overcome that pressure rapidly. Low-status individuals, however, remain impaired. They are crushed by the psychological weight of their own subordination.
But the top of the hierarchy has its own deeply ingrained pathologies. We have to address what the sociological sources call the morality of power. Because the data paints a very grim picture. The higher up the ladder you go, the worse of a human being you seem to become.
The behavioral data compiled on high-status, high-power individuals is indeed sobering. In controlled laboratory settings, high-power individuals perform significantly worse on perspective-taking tasks. They literally cognitively struggle to imagine the world from someone else's point of view.
Empathy disappears.
Furthermore, they're demonstrably worse at accurately reading the emotional expressions on the faces of the people interacting with them.
They lose their empathy, and it translates to action. The sources detail how high-status people are statistically more likely to lie in negotiations, more likely to cheat on games to win a prize, and more likely to make unethical decisions that harm others for their own benefit.
It's a consistent pattern.
The text even highlights a study showing that drivers of high-status luxury cars are significantly more likely to break traffic laws and cut off pedestrians than drivers of cheap cars.
The acquisition of power seems to neurologically insulate them from the social consequences and the reciprocal empathy that keep the rest of us in check. They no longer feel the need to rely on the cooperative network, so they stop utilizing the neural pathways dedicated to it.
That's depressing.
But the truly fascinating and somewhat tragic part of this dynamic is society's reaction to them. Despite being empirically worse at empathy, and despite being statistically more prone to selfish and unethical behavior, society consistently perceives high-status individuals as more competent, more capable, and more trustworthy.
We are so blinded by the evolutionary halo of their status that we inherently trust the exact people who are statistically the most likely to cheat us.
Because our brains are evolutionarily wired to revere the apex of the hierarchy. And thanks to modern fMRI technology, we can actually see exactly where this wiring lives in the human brain. The neuroimaging sources highlight a very specific region called the inferior intraparietal sulcus, or the IPS.
I was reading the section on the IPS, and it struck me as completely bizarre. What is the normal baseline function of the IPS?
Traditionally, in cognitive neuroscience, the IPS is well known for processing number magnitude. It is the core mathematical processor of your brain. It is the region that lights up on a skein when you are trying to figure out if the number 7 is larger than the number 5, or when you are estimating the volume of a liquid. It is dedicated to ranking objective numerical value.
Okay, so it does basic math and geometry. Why is it in a paper about social status?
Because neuroscientists have discovered a massive evolutionary shortcut. If you place a human subject in an fMRI scanner and ask them to rank the value of inanimate objects, say, asking them to determine that a Ferrari is worth more than a Honda, the IPS lights up to process the magnitude of the value. But if you then ask that same subject to rank the military rank of human beings, or to evaluate the social status of different professions, the exact same specific region of the IPS lights up in an identical pattern.
Wait. Let me process that. My brain uses the exact same biological hardware, the same clump of neurons, to decide 7 is mathematically bigger than 5, a Ferrari is financially better than a Honda, and a CEO is socially more valuable than an intern.
Yes. From the perspective of your neural architecture, social rank is not abstract philosophy. It is computed as a literal mathematical magnitude. Evolution didn't build a new brain region for social status. It simply piggybacked on the existing math processor. Human worth is mapped directly onto a biological number line.
That is wild.
And it's not just the IPS doing the work. When your brain recognizes a high-status individual, your amygdala, which processes deep emotional salience and threat detection, and your ventral striatum, which is the absolute core of your brain's dopamine reward center, both light up brilliantly.
It is the exact same mechanism as the monkeys getting the fruit juice. Looking at the boss activates our biological reward circuitry. Our brain literally drugs us for paying attention to power.
Exactly. It is a deeply ingrained chemical reward. But to truly understand how powerful and how incredibly volatile this neurological hardware is, we cannot just look at stable adult brains. We have to look at the period of life when this hardware is being actively built and stress tested.
The teenager phase.
We have to examine the adolescent brain.
Ah, teenagers. The ultimate, unfiltered, heavily dramatic, status-obsessed primates.
It's true, and for a long time we just dismissed it as hormones. But modern neuroscience explains exactly why teenagers act the way they do. During adolescence, there is an absolute explosion of development in the brain's social and reward networks. The hardware is coming online all at once. Teens become hypersensitive to peer feedback.
How sensitive?
When an adult experiences mild social rejection, it's unpleasant. But when a teenager is socially rejected by their peers, fMRI scans show massive, disproportionate spikes of activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, which is the region that processes the feeling of physical and social pain, as well as violent fluctuations in the ventral striatum.
So when a teenager says that being left out of a party feels like they are literally dying, neurologically speaking, the pain they are registering is vastly more intense than what an adult feels.
Yeah.
Rejection literally hurts them more.
Much more. It is an evolutionary alarm bell demanding they secure their place in the tribe. But crucially, while the pain and reward centers are firing at maximum capacity, the inhibitory centers of the brain, specifically regions like the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the VLPFC, which acts as the neurological brakes to help regulate emotions and suppress dangerous impulses, are still physically underactive and structurally immature. They haven't finished wiring yet.
So you have a brain that feels the agonizing pain of low status and the intoxicating thrill of high status more intensely than at any other point in life, but it completely lacks the prefrontal brakes required to rationally regulate its behavior based on those intense feelings.
That is the exact neurological recipe for high-risk behavior, which brings us to an experiment in the sources that I think perfectly encapsulates the adolescent drive for status, the stoplight driving task.
I want to walk through this experiment fully because it is the ultimate synthesis of everything we've talked about today.
Right.
Okay, so researchers take teenagers and put them into a highly realistic virtual driving simulator. And the stated goal of the game is simple: get through the track to the finish line as fast as humanly possible. But there are intersections with stoplights that turn yellow as you approach. The mechanics are a classic risk-reward scenario. If you safely hit the brakes for the yellow light, you avoid a crash, but it delays your time. If you decide to gun it and run the yellow light, you save precious time. BT, there is a high statistical probability that another car hits you, which penalizes your score heavily.
It is a test designed to measure calculated risk aversion.
Right. Now here is the baseline. When teenagers are placed in the simulator and play the game completely alone in a quiet room, they drive remarkably similarly to adults. They calculate the risk rationally, they recognize the penalty of the crash, and they brake for the yellow lights. They prioritize safety over speed.
Makes sense.
But the researchers introduce a single variable. They bring a couple of the teenagers' high school peers into the room and simply ask them to stand behind the chair and watch the teenager play.
They don't have to speak. They don't have to cheer. They just have to observe.
The mere presence of an audience instantly changes the entire neurological equation. Suddenly, the teenager in the driver's seat starts gunning the engine and running almost every single yellow light. They abandon the safe strategy and begin taking massive, reckless, statistically indefensible risks.
Because the goal of the game is no longer getting to the virtual finish line safely, the goal of the game has shifted to social signaling.
Yes, but here is the absolute kicker from the data. They don't just take risks for a random audience. The researchers found that the teens specifically take the most extreme risks when they are being watched by peers whose high social status they desperately want to attain. They're using reckless driving as a costly signal. It is the exact same biological mechanism as the Luke torch fishing or the Miriam turtle hunting, but it is taking place in a virtual car.
That is a brilliant connection. The teenager is intentionally putting themselves at risk of failure to prove their underlying phenotypic quality. Their bravery, their fast reflexes, their absolute disregard for the rules to the high-status members of their tribe. The risk validates the signal.
It's the peacock tail. They are flashing a giant, heavy, dangerous tail in the middle of a simulated intersection.
It is exactly that. And in the complex ecosystem of the teenage world, that resulting status takes two very distinct, highly observable forms, which perfectly mirrors the sociable versus aggressive dominance we discussed in adults. The sociological researchers note that if you map the hierarchy of a high school, there are two distinct types of popularity. The first is pro-social popular.
Right. These are the kids who possess sociable dominance. They are genuinely well-liked. They are friendly. They are often athletic or academically engaged. And they use their status to resolve conflicts. People want to be around them.
And then there is the second category, populistic popularity. These are the kids who possess aggressive dominance. They are arrogant. They are relationally aggressive, meaning they spread rumors and manipulate friendships. They are rule-breaking, and they are often outright bullies.
But the crazy counterintuitive part of the data is that both of these groups are considered by their peers to be popular. Both groups sit at the absolute top of the high school hierarchy.
Yes. Both are listened to, both are deferred to, and both wield immense social power. But the underlying emotion driving that power is different. The pro-social kids are genuinely liked. The populistic kids are feared. The developing adolescent brain, with its hyperactive reward centers and missing breaks, is frantically trying to navigate and map this incredibly complex, treacherous social web.
It's chaotic.
It is trying to figure out who to emulate, who to avoid, and exactly which costly signals to deploy to prove its own worth, all while operating under immense chemical pressure.
Honestly, looking at the neuroscience of it, it is a biological miracle that any of us actually survive high school.
It truly is. High school is a concentrated, high-stakes gauntlet of evolutionary biology playing out every day in the hallways.
Well, as we finally wrap up this massive journey through the literature, let's take a breath and look at the sheer scale of where we've been today. We started with the immense physical burden of the peacock's tail and the gazelle's jump. The foundational idea that nature requires us to carry heavy, dangerous handicaps to prove we aren't faking our genetic fitness.
We observed how that biological mandate translates into human sacrifice hunters running severe caloric deficits and people voluntarily giving away their hard-earned wealth, all to climb the invisible ladder of competitive altruism.
We looked closely at the dark, modern mirror of that altruism, moral grandstanding, the toxic illusion of virtue where we use cheap talk, semantic manipulation, and fake outrage to demand social status we haven't actually earned, distorting the reality of public discourse in the process.
And we traced how our bodies and our neuroanatomy are fundamentally hardwired to spot the winners of this game. How a wide jawline, a deep voice, and an expanded posture trigger involuntary deference. How primate brains will sacrifice calories just to look at a leader. And how our own inferior interparietal sulcus calculates human social worth using the exact same hardware it uses to do basic math.
And finally, we saw how the teenage brain acts as a fiery crucible, where all of these evolutionary forces, the intense drive for reward, the agonizing fear of rejection, and the need to broadcast costly signals explode into real-world behavior. So after all of this, what does this actually mean for you, the listener? Why does understanding this deep biology matter on a Tuesday morning?
It matters intensely because you are constantly playing this evolutionary poker game, whether you consciously realize it or not. You are actively broadcasting your status in every corporate meeting you attend, on every first date you go on, and with every single carefully curated post you make on social media. And simultaneously, your brain is subconsciously, relentlessly reading the status of everyone around you, allocating your attention, your trust, and your deference based on ancient hardwired cues.
Understanding the mechanics behind these invisible signals is like finally being handed the cipher to the matrix. It gives you the analytical power to realize why you are suddenly inexplicably deferring to the tall guy who is speaking quickly and interrupting everyone in the boardroom. It helps you catch your own vanity before you post that outrage-fueled tweet just to look good to your political tribe. It allows you to step back and consciously choose which biological games you actually want to participate in and which ones you want to walk away from.
Exactly. Knowledge of the mechanism is the only way to override the biological autopilot.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that builds directly on the science we've discussed today. We learned that honest signals evolved in nature specifically because they were too costly to fake. The heavy tail, the dangerous high jump, the sacrificed calories of the feast. And we learned that our brains use the IPS to rank the social value of human beings based entirely on the assumption that those signals are real.
Right. The entire biological system functions exclusively because the immense cost guarantees the truth of the signal.
But think about the modern digital reality we are building around ourselves right this second. We are rapidly entering an era dominated by generative AI, ubiquitous, flawless social media beauty filters, and hyper-realistic deepfakes. We are actively engineering a world where generating what looks exactly like a costly, signal-perfect physical beauty, the appearance of immense wealth, highly articulate and persuasive moral arguments, simulated high-level expertise, is practically free. Anyone, regardless of their actual underlying phenotypic quality or character, can generate the ultimate flawless peacock tail with a 3-second text prompt.
That is a profoundly terrifying proposition for a biological system that relies on cost to determine truth.
So the lingering question is this. Is our ancient, hardwired biological hardware heading for a catastrophic crash? If the cost of signaling drops to absolute zero, and we can literally no longer trust our own eyes or ears to tell us who is genuinely capable, who is truly generous, and who is just a clever algorithm grandstanding for attention, how will the human hierarchies of the future actually be built? When the cards at the poker table are no longer just blank, but are actively, flawlessly lying to us, how will we ever know who is actually holding the winning hand? It's something to think deeply about the next time you try to impress someone, or the next time you find yourself suddenly impressed.